You were born in San Francisco.
I was.
Yeah.
Children's Hospital, the public hospital. I miss it. It's not the same city I came up in. You know, back then it was a blue-collar, working-class city. Now it's very gentrified. You really got to have money to be able to live in San Francisco.
Homelessness is so bad in San Francisco. I mean, even compared to New York City. New York City's homeless, especially the obvious, with homeless people being out on the streets all over San Francisco.
Well, the rent is too damn high in San Francisco and New York, and we have 100,000 homeless, and this has really grown under Governor Cuomo's watch, former Secretary of HUD. We have rent regulations coming up for renewal in 2019, next year, and it hasn't been discussed. And it's really disappointing to me that we're having debates where we're not talking about issues like that or upstate. We had a debate last night. The only question about upstate was the Buffalo Bills and whether we should subsidize a stadium. What about our economy here in the southern tier and central New York and the rest of upstate? It's disappointing.
Let's talk about that debate. First of all, the circumstances under which the debate was cobbled together, I felt were suspect to begin with. And you may disagree with, well, of course you're going to disagree with this aspect. I thought it was appropriate to have at least one debate with the major party candidates, with Mark Molinaro and Andrew Cuomo. I think that was okay. I also do believe, though, that Governor Cuomo and Mark Molinaro ought to have at least one other debate that includes you and the two other candidates that people will be considering on November 6th. And I think that debate with all the candidates ought to be held somewhere upstate, whether Syracuse or Rochester or Binghamton or wherever. I definitely think that all five candidates should be featured in a discussion of the issues, and not just limited to 60 minutes, because if you have five candidates, do the math. First of all, it'll be less than 60 minutes actually, so the candidates would only wind up having about 10 minutes to speak in that kind of forum. It has to be a longer forum.
I think we should have a series of debates. I propose 4 debates in 4 cities on 4 topics: the economy, government reform, climate and the environment, and then the social policies from housing to criminal justice reform. And that's what the voters deserve. I think they need to hear from all the candidates. I think it's wrong to exclude ballot qualified candidates just because they're not a major party candidate. Mark Molinaro's chances of winning this race are about as good as mine. So why is he included and not me? Why not have a discussion? Why prejudge who's got good ideas for the state? So I think there are states, Indiana, Ohio, Utah, and Washington State, where they form state debate commissions by media organizations, civic organizations, and educational institutions, and they're strong enough to compel all the candidates to come to their debates, unlike what we have in this state where Governor Cuomo dictates the terms. He's been doing that since he ran in 2010. Then he was the front runner, now he's the incumbent, and the media won't have a debate unless he shows up. And that's a disservice to the people. He should be held to account. I think he's getting a free ride in this election. There are a lot of questions that he's not been asked about. We've had, unprecedented corruption all around him, and he's not solving problems. I mean, I've mentioned this before. We can't even find one day to have a primary for state, local, and federal primaries, which would, stop confusing the voters as to when the primary is. That's a simple problem. And then we got big problems, and we're not getting them solved, and he's getting a free ride.
So what do you think is the main reason for that? I could see maybe if we were only dealing with New York City-based media, but we also have upstate media. Does that also mean that the media organizations, whether they're in Albany or Buffalo or Syracuse or Rochester or Utica or Binghamton, that all those organizations that might really want to compel Governor Cuomo to participate in a real debate upstate, that they essentially are powerless too, just as upstate residents tend to feel when up against the political power of New York City? Is that an underlying truth?
I think if the media organizations got together with the civic organization, the educational institutions, like they have in these other states I mentioned, they'd make it very difficult for the governor not to come. The League of Women Voters, to their credit, has organized a debate for next Thursday, November 1st, 4 of us have agreed to come. The one that's not coming is Governor Cuomo. And they're having trouble getting a media outlet to broadcast their debate because Governor Cuomo won't be there. So you asked, why do I think that is? I think it's partly because the media hasn't really stood up to the governor and, created a situation where, he has to come and before the people and present his views and accounting for what he's done in office. So, and, I sympathize with the media. It's a difficult environment. The New York Daily News fired half their staff in the middle of this campaign for financial reasons.
These are tough times. These are incredibly tough times across the media landscape. We thought things were lean 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but we didn't know how lean they would get. And those cuts, this transformation in the media, those cuts are not over.
Yeah. On the other hand, you have the big media organizations giving big campaign contributions to Governor Cuomo. WCBS or CBS gave $87,000 to Cuomo. Comcast, NBC gave even more, as did Spectrum Charter or Time Warner. The Democrat and Chronicle up in Rochester put this all in a database. So why are they giving money to a governor? What kind of favors are they looking for? And I think, that's an inherent conflict of interest when they're supposed to be reporting on the governor, not helping him get reelected.
Well, what do you think of media organizations if on the one hand they donate to candidates, and then on the other hand they do benefit from whether it's tax breaks or incentive programs? I mean, it's well known that CBS has received millions of dollars in benefits from New York State government over the years, whether at least 2 renovations, say, of the Ed Sullivan Theater for their late show. NBC gets breaks, for example, for keeping Saturday Night Live in New York. Most people don't think NBC would move Saturday Night Live out of New York. It doesn't have the same sort of thing live from Los Angeles. Here it's Saturday night. If say they didn't receive millions of dollars of breaks from the state. So what's going on where you have media organizations who also do receive substantial benefits from New York State programs?
It's called pay to play. The best investment a corporation, whether it's media or any other industry, can make is to get politicians that owe them favors so they can get the kind of favors you were just talking about. The return on investment is incredible for those kind of contributions. That's why we need a public campaign finance system where every candidate runs on clean public money instead of dirty private money that has other interests in mind when they give that money. And one thing you can have when you have a public campaign finance system is a debate system. You don't get your public funding unless you agree to debate. I have a fellow Teamster who's the Green Party candidate for governor in Arizona, Angel Torres, who was on a debate financed by the Citizens Clean Elections Commission in Arizona. In Arizona, they have full public campaign financing. Maine has it as well. New York City has a matching fund system. It's partial public funding, but you don't get that money unless you participate in a debate. So there are ways we could deal with this. And that's another promise that Cuomo said in 2010 he was going to clean up Albany, public campaign finance. He said it again in 2014. He's not really saying what he's going to do this time, but the point is he didn't get it done. And meanwhile, the LLC loophole, which enables real estate developers who have a different LLC for every property they have to give the maximum through each property and totally go around the maximums that everybody else is held to. So these are reforms that he promised and hasn't fulfilled, and I think after 8 years we have to realize he's never going to do it.
Howie Hawkins lives in Syracuse. He's the Green Party candidate for governor of New York. If you could ask Governor Andrew Cuomo one question, say there was one upstate debate and you could pose one question to Governor Cuomo on live TV and radio so millions of people who live upstate could hear this, what question would you ask to Governor Cuomo?
Why are you saying you're moving us toward renewable energy when you're flooding the state with frack gas power plants and pipelines? I mean, he's getting a free ride on that. He compared to some of these other governors, yeah, New York's a little bit better, but the centerpiece of our energy policy is frack gas. It's not renewable energy. We have goals that were way behind meeting that were set before Governor Cuomo got in there in terms of renewables, going back to Pataki, going back to Patterson. And instead of having a real climate action plan, he's, you know, his brother from another mother, Joe Prococo, got bribed to get the permitting for Competitive Power Ventures, a huge frack gas plant that'll add 10% to our greenhouse gas emissions in the state. That's going the wrong way.
You just held a news conference here in downtown Binghamton talking about some of your criminal justice reform initiatives. Can you give us a brief overview of some of the proposals you discussed?
Sure. This is another case where the governor talks progressive and then governs to the right. He had our Green Party candidate for mayor of New York City, Akeem Browder, as a prop at his State of the Union address, saying we're going to get rid of cash bail, we're going to get Khalif's law for speedy trials and some other criminal justice reforms. Akeem ran because his brother was Khalif Browder, who took his own life after spending 3 years on Rikers Island for being accused of stealing a backpack. And in the end, the evidence was dropped. Meanwhile, he spent 2 years in solitary. He got beat up by guards and gangs in there. He was totally traumatized. And so the governor promised to do this, and here we are a year later. It hasn't been done. So I was out there to say, I really mean it. We're going to get rid of cash bail. You know, Prococo and Dean Skelos and Sheldon Silver and these contributors who got caught bribing and kickbacks and bid rigging didn't wait in jail before their trial like poor people do. So that's why we got to get rid of cash bail. And for Khalif to stay there 3 years and then the evidence be dropped is a total injustice. Speedy trials in the U.S. Constitution. So Khalif's law would speed up trials and put the resources in there and prevent prosecutors from delay. So those are two of the reforms I talked about. And then I talked about we've got to legalize marijuana and expunge the records of those with those kind of convictions. It's a substance less damaging than alcohol and tobacco. And we're the marijuana arrest capital of the world. Hundreds of thousands of people have had their lives turned upside down, their access to housing, employment, education made more difficult. That's an injustice we've got to correct.
Speaking with Howie Hawkins, listener suggested I bring up Ralph Nader, and I know over the years you've been very supportive of Ralph Nader, and Mr. Nader's been supportive of you.
Sure. I've got Ralph's endorsement again, which I appreciate. I think you look at what he's done in terms of public safety and environmental protection and consumer protection and workers' rights. The legislation he helped get through Congress, you know, in the late 60s, early 70s, there's nobody in Congress that has that record. And so I'm really proud to have his endorsement.
One other question that comes up, will this likely be your last bid for elective office, or would you leave the door open to possibly running again for governor in 4 years, or perhaps some other office at some point?
Sure, I'll leave the door open. It's up to the Green Party and what we collectively decide is the best way to go forward, who should run for what office. I do know I will be active on these issues, the climate issue, the rent regulations. We need progressive tax reform and invest in our infrastructure. You know, Cuomo and the Republicans talk about how fiscally responsible they are. They have amassed an enormous debt in terms of our infrastructure. We have 1,837 bridges that are structurally deficient. That's a bill of $67 billion. Fixing the subways is about $40 billion over 10 years. Public housing in New York City is $32 billion over 5 years. And you could go on, road, sewers, water systems. We have a water main break just about every day in Syracuse. And a lot of times the road collapses right into the water system. That's a $2 billion upgrade we need in Syracuse. And I could go on. And that deficit has to be paid. The bills come due. And it's something that the state needs to do because it benefits all of us. Instead of giving, you know, tax breaks to campaign contributors, we should do things that benefit all of us. And that would really help our economy because those are good jobs and those people will spend money and business will have to expand to meet those workers' demands for goods and services.
Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate for governor, thanks for stopping by our studio in Binghamton.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.